Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for November 2021. I'm a bit sick today, so this might be a bit less energetic than usual. Sorry about that. And before we get into new stuff in November, I have some content to advertise, stuff that came out this month. So first off, I made a demo of SerenityOS for the Handmade Seattle conference, and you can now see that demo on the conference website. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. And it was very well received, got a lot of great feedback, and a whole bunch of new people found out about the system thanks to that. So really happy with it. And then Linus and I did an interview with Anastasia from JetBrains about SerenityOS and the way that we use their CLion IDE in our daily work. And that's up on the CLion blog. And I also did a developer interview with Brian Gianfrancaro, who's been hacking on SerenityOS since early last year. So I've put links to all of those things in the video description, and check it out. Anyways, let's take a look at some new stuff that's happened in November. The first thing I want to show you is Windows Switcher has a new appearance, and if we open some windows and then press Window tab, then you can see it now has this dark overlay style, which matches all of the other window management overlays like these resize labels. And we also have slightly larger window previews, so it just makes it a little easier to recognize the windows. So that's new. And let me just close these. And then the help program helpfully crashes on exit. And that allows me to show you that Crash Reporter now has this new memory regions view, which just shows all of the memory regions that we had mapped in this process when it crashed. And that was added by Tim. So thank you, Tim. And we also have a new button here, Debug in Hack Studio. And this is a feature added by Itamar, which is really, really sweet. So what it does is it takes the core dump from Crash Reporter and just loads it into Hack Studio. And then it allows us to navigate the crash backtrace here. And we can click on each individual stack frame, and it takes us to the place in the C++ code where we crashed. So we can see that we are in the filtering proxy model destructor on program exit, and probably something goes wrong here with the ordering of the way that we tear things down. We don't really have time to debug that right now, but yes. Anyway, so that's pretty cool. And some other things. Let's see. Let's take a look at settings. So we have a bunch of new settings this month. We have spiced up keyboard settings application. That was, we used to have keyboard settings, but they didn't look quite this nice. So the new UI was added by Sam, and Kleines did a terminal settings application, which allows you to edit the terminal settings, obviously. And we also have a new browser settings, but I will let Linus show you that. But it's really cool to see that the system settings are sort of expanding, and I rather like that we can edit the settings of terminal from a separate place instead of from within the terminal itself. So as you can see, if I edit these here, then the separate terminal program actually updates its appearance. So pretty nifty. Let's close that. Oh, and also I should mention that the while working on this, Sam went and made a common settings window abstraction. So we now have a nice class for quickly creating settings applications that look kind of like this, which is really nice. So thank you, Sam, for working on that. And then let me show you some stuff in Pixel Paint. So let's bring that up. Something that Ben did this month was working on our zoom stuff. So I think he found some bug, and then he went and wanted to edit the way that we just make it nicer, the way we handle zoom levels. So we now have this zoom field here, zoom combo box, which shows you the current zoom level. And you can also drop that down and choose between a bunch of nice options like presets like fit to width, fit to height, fit entire image, and so on. Really, really nice work by Ben. Just adding these zoom options, basically. So that's really cool. And oh, and I did a small feature for Pixel Paint this month as well. That was related to layers. So if we have a layer here, let me just make a little 100 by 100 layer. And you can see that we're actually showing you the layer outline as I move it around, right? Like it has a black box around it. And when you switch the active layer, we just draw a rectangle around the currently active layer. But if you don't want to see that, you can now turn that off using this setting here. So just a little thing, but I'm happy with that, how that turned out. And I guess I don't want to save before I close. So let me show you something else I liked. In the Minesweeper game, we now have a custom difficulty settings. So if you want to create a game where you have, say, 90 columns, 50 is the largest? No? 50 is the largest. All right, fine. 50 is the largest. I wanted 90 by 90, but I guess 50 by 50 is the largest. 50 by 50 with 10 mines. That's a very strange game. Now you have the option. So you no longer have to choose between the presets we had. You can also make a custom game. And that was added by Pedro. So thank you, Pedro, for adding that. Another random thing in our font, like the system font that we use for almost everything. This one is called Kotica, and there's been a whole bunch of glyphs added for various alphabets from around the world, ancient and contemporary. And a lot of this work has been done by Xexa, and it's really, really cool. I feel almost like every day there's some new alphabet added. So really, really nice work. And they also did another entirely separate font called Tiny, which is, as the name kind of gives away, a very tiny typeface. This one is not actually used anywhere in the system at the moment, but it doesn't hurt to have a very tiny font, I guess. So pretty cool stuff. Since we have the terminal up, and we have something here that's linked, as you know, like files in the file system usually get linked in the terminal, and we can see here that it now has a tooltip where it tells us what will happen if you double click on this link. So it says it will open this file with font editor, and if you double click, you can see that indeed that's what happens. So that's really helpful if you have a directory listing like this and you're not quite sure what would happen if you would double click on something. So now it just tells you what would be used to open this file. And this feature was implemented by David. So thank you very much, David, for that. I think now would be a good time to hand over to Linus to let him talk about some other cool stuff.
Okay, so we saw a ton of new features and improvements in LibJS in November. But before we have a look at those, let me briefly mention, as usual, our test262 score. So we use test262, the ECMAScript conformance test suite, regularly, just to track our progress, basically. And this month we went up by a whole 5%. So now up to 76.8, which is pretty damn good, I would say. And also the parser tests are now over 99% passing, so really making progress on both of those. And we'll see how far we can get next month. So let's see, look at the features. So first of all, we got basic support for async and await. So Eden went ahead and implemented that, and it's based on promises. So I got a little demo here. It's just doing a download basically using XML HTTP request and then wrapping that in a promise. And since internally async and await just uses promises in JavaScript, you can then await that. And so down here you see an async function inside it awaits the function call. And if we actually try that web page, I need to close the editor. Click me for fun. Yes. And it works. So downloads in the background, and then once it's finished, basically inserts the content of that. So that's really, really awesome that we got that working now. Ali then went and implemented async functions in the bytecode interpreter. And David went to the parser side of things and did async generator functions and async error functions. And he also implemented 4 await off loops with async and await, so that you can basically await each iteration. And that also involved async iterators, basically. So yeah, really, really good work, everyone involved in that. And the next big thing is we basically just yesterday finished our minimal temporal implementation in libjs. So we now got all 300 something functions implemented. It's been a lot of work, great work by Eden and Luke, and myself, of course, worked on those. So we did over 50 new functions this month, and added a ISO ISO 8601 parser for dates and times, basically converting strings to the objects, and just a bunch of bug fixes and stuff like that. So it doesn't mean that work is over. So we still got stuff to do. So for example, different named time zones. Currently only UTC is supported. Same for calendars. And also the spec is still changing every now and then, so we need to update for that. But let's have a look at a little parsing demo, I would say. So for example, simple plain date parsing. So you can say either you make a new temporal plain date, and then the downside of that is that you have to parse numbers. So the year, for example, 1970, 1, and that's your plain date. But now that we have the parser, we can also say from, which then receives a string, which could be from an API or user input or whatever. And that's simply an ISO string, so like that. And it's going to give you the same result. And it also works for times and time zones and durations. Temporal. Like that. That from. And here it works with a P at the front. And then it's years, months, weeks, days, and so on. So you can say 1 year. And that's simply a duration of 1 year. Or you can say then T and 5 hours. So that's here 1 year at the front and 5 hours. So yeah, temporal, pretty good so far. Obviously still continuing to work on it. I wrote a simple, a small blog post about it if you're interested in reading about the whole process. It took us 5 minutes, so got a couple of things to say about that. It will be linked in the description if you're interested in reading that. And then another large change is more work on the Intel or ECMA 402 spec. That was all done by Tim. He already did the work in the previous month, so he continued. Also extending libunicode, which is now still parsing large parts of the Unicode CLDR, which is the Common Locale Data Repository. So they basically provide a bunch of data for different locales and languages, and we consume that. And so he continued work on the already existing number format and added a bunch of things like different notations. So we can say we make a new number format for ENGB, for example, and then we pass a notation, and that can be different things like scientific, and then we tell it to format our number 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and that's notation. If you spell it properly, it works. So that's the scientific notation with an E at the end. Also got engineering, which is slightly different, or compact, which is quite neat. So then you got 1 through 3K for 1,000 basically. And he also started working on not number format, but datetime format, which will also need some integration with Temporal, but that's still early days. So probably got a demo of that next month. And then David did a whole bunch of work on the parser again. So just earlier today, we merged like 17 different fixes for it. And a lot of that, which is really cool, was discovered on like real websites. So for example, we had an issue with jQuery that would HTTP fetching functionality have an async property in an object, and we couldn't pass that basically. And so that's how we discovered it and then fixed it. So really great work again by David on the parser. And yeah, just some more maintenance work. Eden and I continued our work on moving everything to completions. Luke also did a bit of that. So this pattern where we say a function returns throw completion, or, and then you pass an object. So for example, it returns throw completion or a string. And then within that function, whenever it throws, it will just basically move the error upwards until someone then either cares about the error and reports it or discards it. And it's a really nice way of doing exceptions, which we now use in libjs. So we can just say try, and then whatever bar returns is also either a throw completion or something else. So that just bubbles up, which is a nice star. So one thing that's still left there is the AST. So we'll probably get to that in December then. Yeah, that's all from me. Back to Andreas.
So something I worked on a lot this month is error propagation, and especially in user space programs. So let me create a new Hack Studio project here to show you what that's about. So I'll just make a test project. And we now have a new main signature for Serenity programs, and it returns an error or int, which this gives us a lot more flexibility than just a regular C main function. And the main new thing that this gives us access to is the try macro. So previously, if you wanted to do a bunch of pledges, for example, when you start a program, you would have something that looked a bit like this maybe. And if that fails, of course, then we have to print out that something went wrong and then return an error. And then maybe we would, do something followed by reducing the set of pledge promises. So typical Serenity startup stuff. And of course, other syscalls like unveil and so on. And the super nifty thing with the new main signature is that instead of writing it this way, we can use the try macro for shorthand. So we have these new wrappers for our system calls in the core system area or core system namespace. And you write them like this. So stdio rpath wpath, and then you would do something followed by the second one. So pledge stdio rpath, right? And this is obviously a huge reduction in sort of the vertical size of code, which has been super nice to see. Many of our programs just collapse vertically, become much easier to read. And what this actually does is that it expands to a check. So if this returns an error, then we just return that error wrapped so that it sort of propagates up the call stack. And then Serenity main, of course, is something that the actual main calls. And we have this thing called libmain, which provides this standard C main function. And then it just calls this thing and then unwraps the error for us if one occurs. So let's try actually building something here. And he didn't like that because I guess I have to pass a second string. Oh, wait, shoot. No. It's because I am not linking with libcore. Let's fix that up. Okay, now it builds. So if we run that, it just prints out foo. But let's cause an error. Let's try to pledge something to increase our privilege level. So we'll try to pledge exec after we've said that we're not going to exec. So what would happen is that you get a runtime error, pledge operation not permitted, and so on. And this runtime error message comes from the libmain code. So Serenity main can just return some kind of error, and then the thing outside of Serenity main checks for errors and prints them with as much information as possible. So we're still figuring out how to apply this pattern, but it's been going really well, I think, and a whole bunch of people have helped out on converting programs. So thank you to Kenneth and to Pedro and to everybody else who helped out. I don't remember everybody right now, but it's super nice to have people just pitching in when we have these sort of new ideas that need a lot of testing around the code base. And yeah, so it's pretty sweet stuff. And then let's look at something else. And finally, let me show you some little things that I really like. So for example, the hex dump command now has coalescing of repeating patterns. So say that you were to hex dump the hard drive, for example, then you can see, well, actually, let's pipe that to less. Then you can see these parts here where you have like a large region full of zeros. Then we just coalesce those into a simple line with a star on it like this, instead of just having pages and pages full of zeros. And that was implemented by Pankaj. So thank you very much for doing that one. And other command line stuff, we now have grep-c. So you can grep for number of times that something occurs. So lines that have a 0 on them in etc password. Apparently there's 4 of those. And, you know, it's the equivalent of doing grep for something and piping it to word count -l. But that's pretty nice. And that was added by Tim. So thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, so a lot of mixing and matching of random things this month, but good stuff. And now I guess I should hand it back over to Linus to continue what he was talking about.
Okay, so for November, our focus on the browser was definitely the JavaScript engine, but we have a couple of other changes as well. So let's have a look at those. So first of all, you see I have a demo page open here, and it shows a whole lot of CSS background stuff, which is what Sam worked on this month. So we had some basic support for backgrounds already, but he added a whole bunch of new properties. So for example, background origin, background position, which is important for sprites where multiple images or backgrounds are in the same physical image, and then the browser just picks a region of those, which is really common. And so previously those would just get rendered as the whole thing, and now we can support that properly. Also clipping and various repeat options. So as you can see down here, for example, we got different stretching options, and we got the clipping up there. And further down, we got multiple stacked background. That's also new. Previously, we only had support for a single one. Now you can just repeat as many options as you want and can layer backgrounds, basically. And here we can also see repeat for both directions or only some directions. So this is really, really useful. And he did a great job on that. So good work by Sam. And something small that Andreas did was in the DOM inspector, which we have here. Previously, that would show like a bunch of whitespace nodes. So when the HTML is passed, obviously it's not all on the same line. So there's whitespace, and that would previously show up here and be really distracting and just stretch out the whole tree. And so now no whitespace nodes, but just DOM nodes and comments as well. And also something Andreas did was using the sandboxed image decoder in two more cases. So we already use it for regular images, but it's now also used for favicons. So the one you see up. And for image documents. So when you just open an image in the browser, can show it right now. But then that's creating like a very simple HTML document, just embedding that image, and that's now also loaded more securely. And then let's also briefly have a look at something else that's new in the browser this month, which is a proper settings application. So this was also added by Sam. And if you go down here, settings, you find all the standalone settings that we got. Currently it's just a couple. But new is browser. So we used to have a config file, browser.ini. It still exists, but that was the only way of properly editing browser settings. And up here, you could pick a couple of options, but not all of them. So now we got a proper application, which you can open, change the default URL, change the color theme that the website will then follow if it's using the CSS feature for that. Can decide whether you want to show the bookmarks or not. Search engine configuration, just basic stuff like that. That's going to be really useful in the future, where we could have advanced things like we want to block images from loading, or no JavaScript execution, stuff like that. So nice work by Sam that we got a proper settings app for that now.
So I think that's everything we had to show you today. Thank you all so much for checking in and staying up to date with the project. If you would like to come chat, you can join our Discord server. There's a link in the video description. I also host a weekly live stream here on YouTube called SerenityOS Office Hours. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time. And everybody is welcome with technical and non-technical questions about SerenityOS. And finally, if you would like to sponsor development of SerenityOS, you can find donation options for myself and for Linus in the video description below. I'm personally working on this full-time since May of this year, thanks to the very generous support of many awesome people. So shout outs to everybody who's been supporting me. All right, that's it for today. So thanks for visiting, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.